Welcome to Group Talk. 4 shows, 1 podcast from the Small Group Network focusing on topics relevant to small group ministries. Whether you're in a church of 100 or 10,000, whether you're a volunteer or staff, we want to support, encourage, and equip you to lead well. So relax, listen, and enjoy Reading Lenz with Nick Lenzy.
Hey, Small Group Network. Welcome back to another episode of Reading Lenz. We're so glad that you've chosen the time to hang out with us. I'm Nick Lenzy, and it's an honor to be your host. If you're with us for the first time, welcome. We're so excited you've joined us. Here's how Reading Lenz works. Each month, I have a guest who is also a small group point person to share with you insights from books we are reading and what takeaways we were able to get from them, how we incorporate them into our lives, leaderships, and our small groups. Through the Small Group Network, I've been able to meet so many great people.
And some hacks as well. You know, some great people, some jerks like me. But anyway, go on.
Through the Small Group Network, I've been able to meet so many great people, whether that's in my local huddle or one of our events, Align, Accelerate, or the lobby, which is where I met today's guest, Tommy Carreras.
Hey there.
Hey, we're so glad that you're here with us. And
glad to be here.
Yeah, Tommy is the groups director at Mission Ventura in Ventura, California. Tommy, is that the only thing you do? Just a groups guy?
No,
Never just a groups guy.
I don't think there is a just a groups person in the groups world. No, I do other things like the connection process to, it's a while for somebody to get there. And so a lot of assimilation stuff. I just recently sort of absorbed our pastoral care arm of things. And we also are beefing that up in a lot of ways that I'm super excited about. Actually align with a lot of the things we're going to talk about today. Probably a whole nother podcast, but kind of all that stuff. And then I lead worship. Yeah,
I don't think I've gotten to share this on a previous episode. I have multiple roles too. So I'm mainly the groups guy at Hoboken Grace here in Hoboken, New Jersey. But I come from a career in finance. So I used to work for JP Morgan. And so I also do our books and manage our finances at Hoboken Grace.
Yeah,
so you can tell I'm a very analytical kind of guy. And we actually made like an interesting adjustment with ours in that, like, I don't really have any of the care side, which is good because empathy is not my strength, unfortunately.
I know.
But we have a guy that's just phenomenal at that. And I should have him on a future episode because he's fascinating.
That would be awesome. Yeah. People and budgets, they don't inherently go together, but you make it work. And I love that about you.
One of my other things that I just really enjoy about Tommy, and it's going to come out in this, is Tommy loves bringing bold ideas. So Tommy and I have been going to the lobby, I think, for probably like 3 or 4 consecutive years. And it's one of those things where we get around the fire at night and just let Tommy bring us these crazy ideas. Not necessarily crazy, just bold ideas.
Honestly, they're the things that are stressing me out. But the only way they don't stress me out is if I talk about them endlessly with other people that will go on the journey with me a little bit. And that's honestly why I love the lobby, is because there's a little bit of like great, helpful new stuff, but mostly just space to work out some of these things that are keeping me up at night. Yeah. And I love that.
So one of the things with Reading Lenz is that I love finding the great guests and then I let them choose the book. So Tommy, why don't you walk us through what book you chose for us today?
Yeah, this was literally an Amazon recommendation. So thanks, big brother. But this book is called Tribe, and it's by a guy who wartime journalist, anthropologist. And right off the bat, that's exciting because you're different than me. You're very different. Not a Christian book, but what I've loved about it was that it seemed like he was one of those guys. This is just right off the bat, literally from reading the back cover. It seemed like he was one of those guys that looked and observed so well at this world that God has made, that he was uncovering the truth of how God made the world just by looking carefully enough. And I think that's so helpful because it takes from a different angle the things that we sometimes take for granted to be true, or we say well, the Bible says it's true. And so it's true about how we're wired, how we're made. And I love this guy because he's like, well, it's just true because have you looked at the world? Of course it's this way. Yeah. And I'm like, thank you. I appreciate you saying that. And it just seemed so interesting. And and you mentioned this, Nick, before we were talking even, we were going to do a different book. We're going to do Talking to Strangers, which I highly recommend.
Malcolm Gladwell.
Yeah, it's a great book. Really interesting. But if you've ever read one of his books, he takes you on a weird journey. He's like, well, here are 12 ideas that aren't related, but on the last page, I'll show you how related they are. And I think that's just really fun. And this one is the same way. It's 4 chapters. And he basically, to write the book, was like, there are 4 things that I don't understand. I think there might be a common thread. And he wrote a book about it. And there very clearly is a common thread. It's amazing. And so that's why I picked it.
Yeah. What's funny is one thing what you didn't mention is that the subtitle for this book is On Homecoming and Belonging. And that's the thing that really, when you told me, hey, let's read this book, Tribe, I looked it up on Amazon. And I'll be honest, like just hearing Tribe, I was like, all right, what's this going to be on? But then I saw the Homecoming and Belonging and I was like, oh, that sounds phenomenal. Our the vision statement kind of thing, or not the vision statement. What's like the kind of like what our people do, our group leaders, is they help people belong. So that's what we use here at Hope and Grace, is help people belong. Right. And so when I saw that, I was like, all right, I'm in. Get the book. And I want to share this for those who've been loyally following along on Reading Lenz, so that you know my experience here. So I opened the book, and the first thing is on Native Americans, and it's written by this war journalist. And I just had like this laugh because 2 episodes ago I had Steve Kern, and we did a military book called Extreme Ownership, which is one of the best leadership books I've ever read. And then on the last episode I had it on Kristen Telzero, and we read a book called Canoeing the Mountain, which is a leadership book about Lewis and Clark. And so it naturally features a lot of Native Americans. So you have to imagine myself opening this up, and it's just like, here's the last 2 podcasts combined. People are going to think that this is like a war in Native Americans.
It's like this is the end of the trilogy or something. Yeah, it's beautiful. So. No, I think that's so true. The homecoming and belonging thing, it was perfect, because that's literally what we're trying to do. And somebody that's that much smarter than me, I'm like, I need to know what you're observing about this. Because also, if you're not a Christian, this is not obvious to you that like, we can tell, right? At least the scripture says this is how you're built and you need this desperately. But he doesn't have that. And so I'm like, if you figured it out, you're going to have some really good information that I need. Yeah. And I love that.
Well, I also think that we have a big bias in here as well, because we're community guys. And so his answer to a lot of this is we need communities dying. We need to bring it back. I don't even know that the rest of the people we work with and our staffs necessarily understand that.
That's a scary point that I don't know if you should bring up, but you need to. No, that's so true. Because I think it's something we either take for granted, or we just like kind of suffer in silence a lot of times, which is why it's good for us types to get together to go, is anybody else like experiencing this thing where you're the only one that's maybe flying this flag of we need deeper, richer community? And it's like, you're not the only one, man.
Yeah. Cool.
Really helpful.
So it's 4 chapters around a theme. Could you share with the audience like what that theme is, or what the thesis to this book is?
Yeah, well, it's a good title, because the theme is tribe. and what I love about it is it is that simple. And the interesting thing, so one of the ways that I was preparing for this conversation also was I listened to Sebastian Junger talk to Joe Rogan on his podcast, because he's also the ultimate podcaster. So I'm like, I should just see what he had to say there. And it was right after he wrote the book and all this. And it was interesting because the first question Joe Rogan asked was like, okay, so tribe, were you worried that everybody would throw it out as some political, like bad, scary, tribes are bad? We don't want to tribalize. We want to be unified. And he was like, whoa, this is not what that is. Like, we were built for tribes. And that's the idea. And he doesn't say it in these words specifically, so I'll just add the intention of God into what he says. But we were designed to function together and be necessary parts of something that he said in that podcast even was community with consequences. Ooh. This part where I know, right? He said it and I was like, whoa. I'm going to take that. But that's the whole idea. Like, if I'm not a necessary part of a tight-knit community with a purpose, I will die. And that's his whole idea, even, is like how we got to here is by being those necessary parts of small communities that were literally fighting for survival. The rest of human history, besides like the last 5 minutes, has been fighting against the world that's trying to kill us. And the only way to do that, the only way to survive is together. And his anthropological thing is looking at the world now and going, why are suicide rates going up?
Yeah.
Why are PTSD rates going up, even though fewer soldiers are in combat? why are PTSD rates going up and lasting longer? This is one of the things I love. One of the big questions he's asking, one of the chapters, like, why did all of the English colonists in America, not all of them, but why did so many of them run to the tribes, the American Indian tribes, and not come back and get captured by the brutal, like very brutal existence of these tribes? Why did they stay when given the opportunity to come back?
Yeah.
That's a good question without a clear answer. And so he doesn't even have a thesis like, this is what you need to do.
Yeah.
He's really just saying, this is something you need to know. And there's something afoot. There's a problem happening.
Yeah. In my opinion too, like his thesis is all around that. What we don't see is that community is a resource that's dying. That we don't necessarily see it. So I mean, it's in a sense, it's like the carbon monoxide. You don't see it, but it can kill you, right?
Right.
And so I think that's a big part of his inspiration for this book is we shared he's a wartime journalist. He was with a military group in East Afghanistan, and East Afghanistan conditions aren't great. There's no TV. There's no women. So these guys are alone out there just as this crew, and they got deployed back to Italy, and he was talking with the guys, and all of them wanted to go back to this deserted area in East Afghanistan as opposed to returning home. And it just seemed so countercultural. Like, he gets into like what he ends up discovering is that like there's this sense of common purpose and just having a purpose for life meant so much to these guys that when they came home, it's just really challenging for them to come back into this modern society, because modern society has allowed things to be safe and has allowed things to be individualized. And part of his argument in this is that some of this stuff is hurting us in the long run.
Yeah.
So.
And it wasn't even what I thought was so interesting about it is it wasn't the big grand purpose of like, I'm fighting terrorism.
Yeah.
No, it's not that. It's like, if I don't perform today, if I don't behave correctly, and that's interesting. He has a lot of stuff about like being judged by your behavior in a good way. Like we want to be judged by our good behavior. And that's challenging for people of grace. It's like, we got to cope with that a little bit. What does that mean exactly? What are you trying to say? But he's saying like, if I don't show up, if I don't perform, if I'm not the necessary part of my unit, my small unit of people I love and will die for, gladly. If I don't do that, then Jeff dies. Yeah. And those consequences are a lot different than like, if I don't perform today, terrorism takes a small step forward on the grand scheme of the universe. That's not actually, because the question is like, if that's the big goal, if that's the consequence, if that's the meaning and purpose, because we talk about purpose a lot as Christians, we're like, you need meaning, you need purpose, you have a mission, but the mission is always so big. It's so grand. Save all the people. Cool. Yeah. So I'm going to watch Netflix tonight because I don't know what to do about that.
Yeah.
And it's so big. And the thing is, it's like, well, if you were just fighting terrorism as a soldier, then you should be able to come home and fight terrorism in a new way, or solve poverty, or do something grand. But the point is, it's too big. And maybe this world has gotten too big for our little human souls and minds, because I need to know that if I don't show up, so-and-so is not going to make it. And maybe that's a little drastic, but there's something about the closeness of the consequences that really makes a difference. And that's what stood out to me the most about all of the soldier stuff. It's like, it has to be my immediate community where those consequences live. Yeah. And that's fascinating.
Yeah. And it's funny. You said you mentioned to that other podcast to hear him talk some more. I listened to two. I listened to the one on Joe Rogan. There's another really good one on YouTube that's Google Talks, or Talks at Google, I think is what they're called. I
started that one this morning, which is funny.
And one of the things he was talking in there too, that I don't remember being captured in the book, but he was talking about how, we were designed to really only be in community with about 30 other people, like small kind of village. And that eerily lined up with another book I finished earlier this year called Get Your Life Back by John Eldredge. And he has that same concept, which is that he thinks that's the reason why we can't handle social media, because our souls are only meant to handle the size of a village. And so when we have these thousands of friends, we're actually introducing trauma and all these other things that we weren't supposed to experience. So an example of this is, the Beirut explosion that happened, halfway across the world. Like, we found out within seconds, and we're seeing these really graphic images right away that, like, if you think, like, rewind even 50 years ago, how long that would have taken for us to learn that news and experience that. And then, so it's interesting how those kind of ideas align as well, of just like our souls weren't intentioned to have this many people have influence into it.
Right. Well, and the interesting thing about that too, you think about some of the reasons he talks about the American Indian tribes, what was so compelling to the English colonists. And some of the things that were so compelling was that, first of all, they actually worked less. Most American Indian tribes, hunter-gatherer tribes, were like 4 hours of survival work.
Yeah.
And it's tough work, but they just didn't work as much. But because of the nature of the tribe, because of the size, and because it wasn't like, if you don't listen or follow the rules, you go to jail, right? It wasn't that. It was like, if you don't like it, just leave. Go get a new one. And that was okay. So it was a looser order kind of, but then also it was what that caused, because they were hunter-gatherers and nomadic. It was more egalitarian, right? It was impossible to just pass down wealth. It was whatever I have now, and so there was much lower wealth inequality, and then also everything was like, the unit was the most important thing, and I think that can go too far, right? We can't be totally collectivist.
Yes.
And we can't be totally individualist. There's a beautiful balance, but we're probably a little too far on the individualist. But it's interesting because this idea, like, the wealth inequality is lower, and it was almost impossible to abuse power. And I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah.
But those things, like, if you look at social media and just the nature of the world, I know that Jeff Bezos has more money than I can actually even grasp.
Yeah.
I shouldn't know that, because if I look at my neighbors, one house next to me, they rent and they probably have a little bit less than me. The other house, and we're in SoCal and everybody's broke. You're in Jersey. Everybody's actually kind of broke. Yeah. But
we're all in ministry, so if you're that rich,
so we're all.
Don't have you on the next podcast.
But the guy next to me is a little bit broker than me, and the house next to me on the other side, definitely like the random nicest house on the block. It's so random. But I can deal with that level of inequality really easily, because it's like, we can pass it around if we need to. And my friends, I can deal with our levels of inequality. But with social media, I know all the celebrities whose net worth is $100 million. And that's hard to deal with. It's confusing, because I'm not meant to deal with that many other people's lives. And so that size, that like unit of 30, 50, 70, 100, and that's what this whole book hits at.
Yeah.
I don't have to have everybody know me completely, but I do need to know that it's that, like, why most churches in America are like, how many? 75 people. It's because it's a sweet spot. Yeah. And I'm not saying that all of our churches should just divide into 75%. I don't mean that. Yeah. But we need to, I've been grappling with, like, how do I create those feelings? Is it all the people in groups? Is it multiple groups? I don't know exactly methodologically, but there's something about that size that matters a lot.
Yeah. How has this book influenced your ministry? How does this help you think about it?
Interestingly enough, the main place that started to influence me was like, am I, and I've been thinking this for a while, and this just accelerated it, am I the prophetic voice speaking out counterculturally against what is anti-human? Because if I'm pro-Jesus, that means I'm pro-human, because he created us in a specific way, and there are ways that we can destroy ourselves and others. And there are some personal ways we can do that, and we focus on those a lot, but man, there's some cultural ways we can do that. And those are really bad. And something I heard recently, especially in this election season, I know I said the E word, I'm sorry, but in this election season, it's been really interesting, because some of the most important things I've heard, it was Andy Stanley. Andy Stanley always says it. I shouldn't have said that. I thought this up. It was definitely me. Andy Stanley said, when we're at our best, we are a prophetic voice that speaks out against all things that are anti-human. And we refuse to align with anything accept what is true. And that means we're always being the moral compass. We're fighting to be the moral compass of the world. And this is really interesting because this actually helps us do that. And when we have the information, when we trust the experts that are looking at the world better than anybody, this guy I found out doesn't even have a smartphone. He still uses a flip phone. He's like, I don't see what benefit I would get from that. I go out into the world, and you know where I want to be? Out in the world. When we care enough about learning why the problem is bigger than we thought, we can actually then have some of the confidence and the competency to speak out against things that are ruining the human experience. It's speaking out against the things that are clearly hurting us. And that is something that God does and that we want to do. And so I want to champion that. And this book has really helped me go like, I need to question things in a deeper way, because that'll also help me speak more to the heart, the broken heart of the person in the seat, right? That I'm trying to reach and go, I don't want to do the flowery promo. Don't you want some nice friends? Don't you want to grow? Don't you want to, like, first of all, what does any of that mean? How about, what if we sometimes just shoot it like, have you ever noticed that we have a deep isolation problem and something's wrong and you know it's wrong? We're trying to combat that on every level. That's that's interesting. That even gives us a little bit of a common enemy. We're not trying to like have some nice friends. Like, you have some nice friends. None of them are good enough though. And you know that. But what we really want to do is learn how to be human again. And what does that mean? That means actually being known by people in a deep way.
Yeah.
Who will die in the trenches with you and who will actually go and combat loneliness together. We're trying to destroy isolation inside of our midst. Like we're trying to unite against those things. And so this book gives me some of the excitement and also a little bit of the expertise, honestly, to speak out against those things. That's the first way it's been influencing me.
I think too, it also really just highlights nothing that Rick Warren didn't teach us 25, 30 years ago, in that like we all need purpose in life. And obviously we have the advantage of knowing that purpose, right? But just really helping understand that like everyone needs a role. Everyone needs to have a purpose. They need to know that they are able to contribute to a community. And I think that's one of the biggest advantages that we have as, small group people in our churches, is giving them this outlet that they actually need in life to help them psychologically and mentally and everything else that comes with it. So that's a good rabbit trail to go down, because I remember we talked. Was it this last lobby or was it the last one? It was one of the lobbies ago. But we started talking about something that was really on my mind a lot, and that I was trying to move kind of my whole ministry toward. I was like, I don't like the goal of my group's ministry. This is a scary place to start. Like, I'm not jazzed about trying to find people better friends. And I know that's like, why do you have this guy on the podcast right now? That doesn't sound healthy, but I just wasn't excited about it, because I saw that like groups weren't staying together. People were just in and out and maybe, and I don't know. And leaders were just dying. Being consumers.
Because it's nothing, like nobody was getting what I thought they could get out of it. And I realized this is the scary question that I asked myself. And I realized I wasn't aiming high enough, and that my goal was too low. I don't want to find people better friends. My real goal started to become to make people better friends. All the people, not just the leaders. But it was the right question to be asking. So I started trying to train group members instead of just train group leaders.
Yes. This is the concept we talked about this year. How do we train our group members to be good group members? And that concept alone set me on my own rabbit trail, and was just like genius. That was the thing from this. I think every lobby or small group network event thing always leaves me going home with one big idea. And this past year was you just challenging us on, how do you train group members? We train coaches to be coaches. We train leaders to be leaders, but we don't train group members to be group members. And this whole
they're
year,
the ones that need the most help. Yeah.
Like my associate Sarah and I literally just tackled that. And the way that we did it in ours is that every group starts with a 10-week group with us. And we used to have this video that was done by our lead pastor. It was 40 minutes long. And it was like, why, how we do groups. And nobody watched it. Like,
I'm shocked. I'm shocked.
But we took that video and we broke it up and we added into it elements that taught people, this is how our groups work. This is how it's different. This is how it's not a traditional Bible study, because you need this fellowship. You need the act. Like for us, it's all about the taking steps and activating your faith. And our groups have just really solidified, and we've gotten better group members. So Tommy, I thank you for bringing that idea and stuff like that. But
thank you for going on the journey with me, because it's been stressful, because it's a lot weirder, and it means I'm never actually hitting my goal, because it's a lot higher goal. But it's interesting too, because the main thing, and just to put a little more oomph behind that too, because I'm so obsessed with that idea still. A little more oomph even is like, because if I only help them follow Jesus right now, I've missed the mark completely, because getting them good friends now is going to help them follow Jesus now. Teaching them how to be good friends helps them follow Jesus for the rest of their lives, and helps the next guy follow Jesus, because what's values are more caught than taught, and they're going to spread that around somewhere else. They're going to change the world if they're better friends.
That's a sneaky advantage that we have here in Hoboken. So we're across the river from Manhattan. And so we have extremely transient community. So we get people for about 2 to 3 years before they move on. And a couple years ago, it hit us like, okay, how do we send these people out better than we found them? How do we send them to the next church? And that attitude has helped us so much. And I love that, like, you're kind of picking up on that too, of like, I can't just teach them how to be great here and now. I need to teach them so that they can go out and help their community at large. So true. Hey, let's bring up this other thing. So he taught me a new word. This is gonna be funny. I don't know whether people know this word or not, but modernity is a word that I didn't realize. I always thought it was modernity, but it's modernity, which is like the concept of becoming more modern and things like that. And the only time, so Tommy talked about this earlier, of how as societies become safer, as they become more affluent, suicide rates and depression come up with it. And one of the rare things that goes against this, that's countercultural, is when extreme circumstances come about, whether it's through war, whether it's through, he used 9/11 to talk about rates in America. And also, I think it was Bosnia was the other one he talked about, or Sarajevo.
Gosh. Seriously. Yeah. Civil war in Bosnia.
And he talked about, like, these people afterwards wanted to go back to that time where there was the extreme circumstances, because they felt more community. They felt more needed. Meanwhile, they're being bombed. They're being taken out of their homes. They're being, or natural disaster hits them, those kind of things. So
the Blitz in London was another example. 30,000 people dead on their own streets in London. And people longed for those times. It's like, that feels wrong.
Have you guys ever experienced that in your own community?
Well, so three years ago now, we had, at the time, it was like quickly overtaken in size, which is interesting. But at the time, the largest wildfire in California history by acreage started in Santa Paula, which is about 15 minutes away from Ventura. And I remember going to sleep at 10:30 that night and hearing that there was a small brush fire that started in Santa Paula. I was like, I'm going to make sure to check in on that tomorrow. And then it turned out a lot of things happened overnight. I fell asleep like literally 10 minutes before my executive pastor texts everybody and says, by the way, we're opening up as a shelter. I'll be there all night, blah, 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 this whole thing. I wake up at 5:30 randomly and I look at my phone and my city's Ventura is on fire. And I wake up and my city's on fire. And I'm like, I call Jim. He's like, yep, been here all night. We got people sleeping in the building. And I look outside, and the beautiful thing about SoCal is it's really common that, I can like smell the beach from where I live, but then also see the mountains. It's awesome, except when the mountains are orange. You wake up at 5:30 in the morning, the mountains are orange, and it's like, this is really bad. 1,000 homes were destroyed. Friends of mine lost their homes, lost everything they had, all of these things, right? So just like intense trauma. Only 2 people died is amazing, but 1,000 homes, it was a full week.
So much property gone.
I like literally, I wake my wife up and I'm like, I gotta go. I'm going to work. And she's like, what's happening? Well, the city's on fire. So I'll see you in a week, I guess. Like, I just didn't know. And so I pick up water. We get to the building. We end up every day, every minute, we're changing the plan. By the end of the week, we had been a shelter, a distribution center. We had our whole building full of stuff 3 times over because stuff would leave. We had 1,000 families come through to pick up things that they needed in the moment because all their stuff was gone. It was all donated. It was insanity. We got money from every church that we were at all connected to and anywhere, even the other churches in the city were like, we'll be the fund. We're handing out money to other churches to give to their people. It was like insane. The crazier part is that we had and at the time we're a church of 800 maybe on the weekend. We had over 2,500 people in 5 days come through as volunteers.
Jeez. That's incredible.
And so our building, with anybody, people would show up and be like, we heard you're the place that's doing stuff.
Yeah.
And so what do I do? And they did anything. Man, they did the most menial, frustrating work. And for
not a single complaint.
Long, everybody was thankful. It was like they walked in and it was like, put me to work. I'll do anything. It's hard work. You got to wear a mask. Literally, you can't see. There's smoke in the air. And everybody was like, thank you so much for doing something. I don't know what I would have done if I was sitting at home.
Yeah.
This idea that crisis is so important to bringing communities together, that's confusing because I don't think we should probably start crises. or tragedy. So they're really good for us. So I don't know what to do about
I'll
that.
keep this quick. We went through the same thing at Hoboken Grace. I lived here during Hurricane Sandy. We took on 6 feet of water. It completely took out our town.
It's crazy.
Just had to, once the flooding subsided, just taking everything out. And you usually think of flooding, you think of it along a river. Obviously we're along a river, right? But you usually don't think of it in high populated areas. And so, we really rallied around that, and it was huge for our community and opened up so many doors in our community that it was such a great opportunity and brought our staff together. But there's a quote from the book about a psychological study. I'm going to read this real quick. It says, when people are actively engaged in a cause, their lives have more purpose, with resulting improvement in mental health. And this is from the Journal of Psychomatic Research in 1971. It said, but it would be irresponsible to suggest that violence as a means of improving mental health. But the study suggests that people feel better psychologically if they have more involvement in their community.
Make sense of that.
Okay, so then the question that we have to ask ourselves, as the group guys, we can't root to have natural disasters or these emergencies or
be irresponsible,
create war, right? So what can we do to build stronger bonds in our community when there's not an extreme event that's going on?
Well, I think it's interesting because Ephesians gives it to us already, right? Like our struggle is not against flesh and blood.
Yeah.
And sometimes we stop and it's like, okay, don't fight each other. Remember, the bad people aren't the enemy. We got to love them anyway. But no, it keeps going. Your struggle is against the rulers, the authorities, and the powers of this dark world. So Ephesians gives us this answer because our struggle is not against flesh and blood. It's not against the people. The people aren't our enemies. But there is a struggle, and it's against the rulers, against the authorities, and the powers of this dark world, and the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Like, there's a real enemy, and the enemy is destroying people. And if we're not rallying against that, we're gonna crumble. It's interesting, and this is a big topic, but this is good. This is why it's so clear. If our church is not tipped always, and I guess leaned over toward rooting out hopelessness in our community, finding the lost one. Right? Yeah. There's more rejoicing in heaven when the lost one comes home than when the 99 stay home. If my church isn't, and if I'm not personally more geared toward going, no, I got to push myself out. I got to push myself to find the lost one. I got to push myself to reach my hopeless and broken friends. I have to push myself out toward evangelism. If we're not leaning in that direction always, our church will crumble, not because we didn't pay enough attention to the inside. And yes, we have to pay enough and build up the inside. But it's actually the looking outside. It's actually uniting against the common enemy of hopelessness and against the common enemy of the fact that people that God loves are lost and broken and hurting each other and hurting themselves. If I'm not stressed about that, and if I'm not really focused on destroying that enemy of hopelessness, I don't think my church is going to make it. It's not if I don't focus on my church enough. And so I think that's fascinating. Like, we have to rally the forces against a common enemy if we're going to make it. And we have one. We have a lot. And that comes back to the countercultural voice, right? Like, we need to root out things that are anti-human, like addictions and the inability to change and people being consumers only. Like, there's fascinating stuff in this.
Growing amount of loneliness, right?
Yeah. That's something we can unite against.
Another quote from the book that just says, humans don't mind hardships. In fact, they thrive on it.
Right.
What they mind is not feeling necessary. Modern society has perfected the art of making people feel necessary. And I think like this is where our group's opportunities are, helping them find a purpose. And I think a lot of it is that like we're so focused on ourselves. And I think one of the things that groups can really help with is helping them turn that vision around to see others. And usually they're going to see it within their own groups. I think as group directors, we've probably each dealt with several groups that had a problem with someone who just came and spilled and then leaves and doesn't actually understand the concept that like, no, we're in this for everyone else. And I think one of the things that helps, I actually got this idea from just being around Steve Gladen, who's our founder of Small Group Network, but in his book, Small Groups with Purpose, a must for any small group director, is just that like figuring out what's your group's weakness. So we want to be balanced, obviously, in those purposes that they use. And I think one of them that would be really helpful in this is knowing what purpose your group is weak in and spending time in that. And obviously, maybe that's evangelism, right? Or sharing their faith with others. If you're able to challenge your group in that area, it's going to be hard for them, but they have each other. And then that's really going to help bring them together. Challenging yourself to get outside that comfort zone is so important at building community and fighting loneliness. So
well, it's just the reality is it's very clear that like Jesus's glory came from suffering.
Yeah.
And so the path to glory is always through suffering. And so as leaders, I need to be in touch with my own suffering. I need to be in touch with my own brokenness and my own weak places, because that's where my strength comes from too. Like 2 Corinthians 12, my strength is only found when it's not mine, when it's his, and it's only found in my weakness. And so if I'm reveling in my strengths as a leader, that's interesting when you think about leadership development. We're not just trying to make stronger leaders. This is a little weird sounding, but like we're trying to actually make weaker leaders. Probably more humble leaders. That's what I'm going for.
Yeah,
but
I think that's what you're looking for.
That probably takes a little more thought in advance. I'm thinking as I go here, but it makes sense that we're not trying to just give our leaders better skills and our people better skills. We're trying to create dependence by actually pushing them toward their weak places. Yeah. And if we really want to get granular, that means I have to be always pushing toward my weak places. If I'm not in touch with the bleeding edge of my own suffering and my own incompetence or sin or temptation or whatever those things are, if I'm not in touch with those, why in the world would I expect my leaders to be? And why would I expect a group to gel? Honestly, and I'm not saying like massive codependence, like, well, if I'm not okay, then nobody else will be okay. That's not what I mean. But it does mean if I want to lead by example, it means I'm very humble and also leaning into my weakness and suffering. And that I'm talking to myself right now. So
awesome.
I think that's a really important place to start.
All right, so I'm gonna start to wind this down. Listen, I really encourage you guys to pick up this book. It's only 175 pages. There's like several topics that we haven't hit that are just really fascinating stories. There's one in there that we're not going to talk about that's about this fight between French and Moroccans that is excellent at talking about like conflict resolution. That is really important as group leaders. And I'm sorry, we're not going to get to it,
but it's so good. The conflict resolution thing.
That's going to be my enticing to get you guys there. So, hey, let's dive into our little lightning round. Tommy, same questions we have every podcast. But so what's another book you've read recently that's had an impact on your leadership?
Yeah, honestly, probably the most challenging and helpful book. And this is just a journey we're going on as a church and as a ministry. We're trying to build out a whole kind of new arm called the Care Academy at Mission. That'll be next cool thing we talk about
for something?
at the lobby. No, we don't do acronyms, but it stands for CARE, which is caring. Anyway, there's a guy at Mission who he's been around for about 5 years, but for 50 years, he and his wife have been working in the recovery world. It's recovery from everything. So they built a curriculum and a program and a process and a whole organization. They train counselors. They have something called change groups, which I'm excited to talk about this with you at some point because it's crazy. They're phenomenal. He's one of the most brilliant people I've ever met. And he's just like sitting in our lap right here at Mission. So it's like awesome. His name is Michael Dye, created this Genesis process. So he has a book called The Church, Helping or Hurting, A Guide to Practical Christianity. One of his main ideas is we need to be full of grace, but also competency. Yeah. The local church has to be full of grace and a competency, effectiveness. We have to, like, real hope comes when somebody looks at you and says, I accept you as you are, but I also know how you can change. And not just like, I know that Jesus will change you, but like, I know what's wrong in your brain. He's a neuroscientist and also an addiction counselor. And he built this recovery program. Wow. And it is phenomenal. You could actually, we just did a 7-part workshop on it. We tried to distill his 7-part and it was distilled down. It was like 20% of what we wanted to do. It's all at missionventura.com/change workshop. It's phenomenal. So that's a lot of his stuff. We just made it all free and really easy accessible. Because
what was the name again? What was the
good? But the book is called The Church, Helping or Hurting. It's really thick. It's really long, but also you could read a page and basically stew on it for a week. He's the king. I highly encourage it.
Okay, what's one book you're looking forward to?
Well, 2 books I'm looking forward to.
I said one. No, I was kidding.
Yeah, don't do that. One book is called Unhindered. It's Aligning the Story of Your Heart. It's by 2 PhD counselors that run a phenomenal ministry that I may or may not have benefited from personally. Called The Blessing Ranch in Florida. It's literally a week of intensive counseling for pastors. And they have up to 4 individuals or couples at a time only. They have just the 2 of them. It's Charity and John. And they you're in like 4 or 5 hours of counseling a day. And it's a little intense, but they wrote a book with all of their stuff called Unhindered. And it is like, if you're hurting or like feel misaligned in your own self, it's interesting how much the Genesis process and their stuff goes together. It's very similar. But it is so good and it will bring so much clarity and refreshment to your soul. I promise.
Man,
at least she brought it for my wife and I, but also the book, I would imagine, I haven't read it yet because I just got it in the mail, but I would imagine it would do the same thing.
Tommy, a pleasure as always. I'm Nick Lenzy, and I want to thank you guys for listening to us. Thanks, Tommy, for sharing your experiences. We hope that you enjoyed today's podcast. Reading Lenz is going to be back next month with Aaron Burton from Downtown Community Church in Jersey City, New Jersey. So I'm bringing my local flair into this. We're going to be covering the book Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a Loud World. I'm super excited to get into this. As you heard at the very start of the podcast, if you listen the whole way through, I'm an extreme extrovert. So this is going to be good for me to go through a book and learn about the other side. So if you want to read along with us, you can get a head start. Remember, leaders are readers. Take care, everyone.
Hey, Small Group Network family, Jason Banzoff here, Group Talk producer and Small Group Network creative arts director. On behalf of the Small Group Network, we want to say happy Thanksgiving to you, and also thank you for tuning into this great episode of Reading Lenz, and thank you to Nick Lenzy and Tommy Carreras for that great episode. Now, before we go, we want to talk about something new and exciting. We are excited to announce our brand new online training course, Kids Small Groups, Intentional Discipleship Pathway. Learn the key foundations to launch and lead dynamic kids small groups at your church. This course features 5 high-definition video sessions, downloadable documents, and lesson discussion questions. Learn more by watching the free course introduction and enroll today at smallgroupnetwork.com/KSG. Again, that's smallgroupnetwork.com/KSG. And thank you for listening to Group Talk. We invite you to subscribe to our podcast through iTunes and get new episodes downloaded automatically. Also, if you enjoy this program, please take a few minutes to give us a positive rating on iTunes so that other small group point people can find us more easily. We encourage you to visit our website at smallgroupnetwork.com to access our library of free resources, connect to a huddle with other small group ministry leaders in your area, read our blog articles, or join us on our Facebook group. Don't forget to use the hashtag SGNet when engaging with your social media channels. Thank you for your support.